when I saw my treacherous wife with another man in our house. I recorded everything on video and took revenge on them, and after that I never expected life to take this kind of turn. I've always been a hard worker, the kind of guy who clocks in, gets the job done, and doesn't complain. So when the company announced that they were restructuring the shifts and offering promotions, I saw it as an opportunity to finally balance my work with my personal life. The night shift was the promotion I didn't know I needed. Sure, it meant long hours, but it also meant I could spend more time with my boys without having to sacrifice my job. Before all this, my days were a blur of early morning alarms, hurried breakfasts, and rushing out the door while my wife, Olivia, took care of our two boys, Ethan, who's 14, and Logan, who's just turned 10. We live in a fairly quiet suburban neighborhood in a city called Evansville, one of those places where you get to know the neighbors pretty well and life moves at a pace you can manage. The house itself, a modest two-story with a garage attached, was our little corner of the world. But lately, I've been feeling like it's more of a house than a home. Olivia and I have been married for over 15 years, and while we've had our share of ups and downs, I always thought we were solid. But things had been off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there were signs. Small things that felt out of place, like her spending more time at the gym, or having to stay late at work to help out a coworker whose name I kept forgetting because, frankly, I never paid attention to it. In hindsight, maybe I should have, but I was focused on the good. This new night shift meant I'd have mornings free with the boys. I'd be able to help them get ready for school, maybe even make breakfast and take them out on weekends without worrying about my job schedule getting in the way. I'd taken a couple of days off to get the house in order and set up an apartment above the garage where I could relax during the day and sleep without being disturbed. I figured it'd be perfect, my own little space to unwind after a long night of work. The apartment above the garage wasn't much when I started. Just a dusty old storage space with a few boxes of Christmas decorations and tools we hadn't touched in years. But with a bit of work, I knew I could turn it into something decent. I spent my days moving furniture, painting the walls, and installing an internet connection so I could stream some TV when I needed to wind down. It felt good to have a project, something to focus on. Then came the day when everything changed. It was a Wednesday morning, and I was nearly done setting up the apartment. I'd just finished mounting the router when I heard a noise coming from the house. At first, I thought it might have been the boys. Maybe one of them had stayed home from school sick. But no, it was too early. The house should have been empty. Olivia would have already left for work, and the boys had an early start that day. My curiosity got the better of me, so I moved toward the ventilation grill that connected the garage apartment to the main house. It was just a small gap, really, but from my angle, I could see straight into our bedroom. That's when I saw them. My wife, Olivia, was there with him. The coworker. I recognized him right away. He wasn't some faceless stranger, but someone she'd mentioned casually over the last few months, always with a sort of indifferent tone that hadn't alarmed me at the time. He was younger, probably in his mid-30s, with the kind of cocky smile that had me instantly despising him. And there they were, wrapped up in each other like I didn't exist. It felt like someone had driven a knife into my gut. I couldn't move. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. There was a sick feeling crawling up my throat, but I stayed completely silent. Maybe, on some level, I had been expecting this. All the signs were there. I just didn't want to acknowledge them. Watching them like that, in the house I'd worked so hard to build, was like a punch to the gut. But the anger, the rage, it didn't come. Not right away. Instead, there was a strange numbness that took over. I quietly pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, and started recording. I didn't know why. Maybe it was proof. Maybe it was to force myself to accept the reality of what was happening. I just knew I had to capture it. After a few minutes, I stopped the recording and backed away from the vent. My mind was blank, but one thing became clear to me in that moment. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. The boys needed me, and they didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess. Whatever Olivia and that guy were doing, I wasn't going to let it destroy what I had with my sons. Instead of storming into the house or confronting Olivia, I decided to focus on my sons. They were the only thing that mattered to me now. Ethan was at that age where he was starting to become more independent, but he still looked up to me. Logan was younger, more carefree, but I knew that he needed a steady presence in his life, especially now. I wasn't going to let Olivia's betrayal ruin my relationship with them. The apartment became my refuge. I sped up the renovation, making it as comfortable as possible. I worked late into the night after my shifts, installing blackout curtains, a small kitchenette, and even a second TV so I could spend time there without having to go inside the house unless it was absolutely necessary. The boys were none the wiser. To them, I was just working hard on my man cave project, something they thought was pretty cool. I made sure to keep up appearances, acting normal around Olivia, even though every time I looked at her, I felt like I was living with a stranger. She, of course, had no idea that I knew. I guess in some twisted way, that gave me an advantage. I wasn't going to play the role of the betrayed husband who crumbles under the weight of his wife's infidelity. No, I had a plan. I would stay. I would be there for Ethan and Logan, making sure they had a stable home until they finished school. They deserved that much. They deserved to have their father around, even if their mother was someone I could no longer trust. I started making plans. Not big, life-changing plans, but small ones that would give me a sense of control over the situation. I would finish the apartment and move in there permanently. Olivia and I would live separately, but under the same roof. I figured it wouldn't be too hard. After all, I was working nights now, and our paths didn't cross much during the day. I'd set boundaries, keep my distance from her, and focus all my attention on the boys. It wasn't easy. Every day felt like a balancing act, pretending everything was fine when, in reality, my marriage was crumbling. But I was determined to stay calm, to keep things together until the boys were old enough to understand. The last thing I wanted was for them to get caught in the middle of a messy divorce or a confrontation between their parents. They were good kids, and they didn't need to see the ugliness that was festering just beneath the surface of our home. As the days passed, I became more and more detached from Olivia. It was like living with a ghost. She must have sensed that something was off, but if she did, she didn't say anything. Maybe she thought I was just tired from the new shift, or maybe she was too wrapped up in her own world to notice. Either way, I didn't care. I had my boys and I had my plan. That was all I needed. The apartment was coming together nicely. It was small but comfortable, and it gave me the space I needed to think, to breathe. I'd sit there for hours, scrolling through my phone, watching that video I'd taken over and over again. It served as a reminder of what I was dealing with, of why I had to be strong. I'd keep my head down, take care of the boys. But until then, I was going to play my part. The boys didn't need to know. Not yet. I could feel Olivia starting to notice the change in me, but I didn't care. Every morning when I came home from my night shift, she'd look at me with that same expression, like she was trying to figure me out. There was a time when I would have cared about her concerns, but those days were gone. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. It wasn't that I completely shut her out. I was calm, maybe even too calm for someone who knew his wife was having an affair. That's what probably threw her off. Most men in my position would have blown up, confronted her, screamed, or at least started an argument. But not me. I kept my composure. If anything, I was playing the long game, one that revolved around my son's and my own happiness, not hers. Ethan was 14 now, and Logan, at 10, was still full of energy, oblivious to what was going on between his parents. They both deserved stability, so I made sure they got it. I played the role of the loving father, just as I always had. But things were different with Olivia. I'd lie in bed next to her some nights, wondering how I ever missed the signs. It's not like her affair had started overnight. She'd probably been seeing him for months, if not longer. Maybe there were signs I didn't want to see back then. All those late nights she worked, the way she started dressing up more, or how she'd act overly nice to me when she came home, almost as if she was covering up some guilt. In hindsight, it all made sense, but now it was too late to dwell on it. I had a plan, and I was sticking to it. My escape from Olivia came in the form of other things, other people. I wasn't looking for anything, but it happened naturally. I had been spending more time at Ethan's soccer games, and as fate would have it, I started talking to his friend's mom, Sarah. Sarah was a single mom, around my age, maybe a couple of years younger, with a sharp wit and a smile that made it easy to talk to her. Her son, Ryan, had been friends with Ethan for years, so it wasn't like she was a stranger. We'd run into each other at games and school events, but I'd never paid much attention to her until now. It started out innocent enough. Small talk on the sidelines while we watched the boys play soccer. Sarah always seemed to be there alone, and I figured she could use the company. Over time, though, our conversations became more personal. We talk about parenting, life, and the challenges that came with raising teenage boys. She didn't ask too many questions about Olivia, and I didn't volunteer much information, but there was something unspoken between us. We both knew there was a connection growing, but we didn't rush it. It wasn't long before I found myself looking forward to those soccer games more than anything else. Spending time with Sarah was like stepping into another world, one where the mess of my marriage didn't exist. We'd sit together at the games, laughing about the little things, like how Ryan always seemed to trip over the ball or how Ethan would get frustrated when the ref made a bad call. Those moments made me forget about everything else. Eventually, we started seeing each other outside of the games. It was nothing official, just grabbing coffee after practice or talking in the parking lot while the boys goofed off with their friends. But those moments turned into more. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, and before I knew it, we were meeting up more often. At first, it was innocent, just friends who happened to be in the same boat. But that changed the day I invited her to see the apartment I'd been working on above the garage. The apartment had become my sanctuary by then. It was fully furnished, with everything I needed to relax after a long night shift. I wasn't living in it full-time yet, but I spent a lot of time there, more than I did in the actual house. When I brought Sarah up there, it felt right. We sat together on the couch, talking like we always did, but there was something different that day, an unspoken tension in the air that neither of us could ignore. She wasn't just Ethan's friend's mom anymore. She was someone who made me feel alive again. Things progressed from there. Our relationship became something more than just casual meetings at soccer games. We grew closer, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had something for myself. It wasn't about revenge on Olivia or trying to escape the mess my marriage had become. It was about finding someone who made me feel seen, understood. Sarah did that for me. Meanwhile, at home, things with Olivia remained unchanged on the surface, but the distance between us continued to grow. She must have known something was off, but she never asked. I think part of her was relieved that I wasn't confronting her about the affair. Maybe she thought I didn't know, or maybe she didn't care. Either way, I wasn't about to make it easy for her. I had my plan, and that meant keeping things quiet for the boys' sake. Ethan was getting better at soccer, and I decided to step up my involvement with his team. The coach had mentioned needing some extra help, so I volunteered to assist with practices. It gave me more time with Ethan, and I enjoyed being part of something that mattered to him. I wasn't the most athletic guy, but I knew enough to help out, and the boys seemed to appreciate having me around. Plus, it gave me an excuse to be at the field more often, which meant more time with Sarah. Logan, on the other hand, was more into video games than sports. He wasn't interested in soccer like his older brother, but I still made time for him. We'd spend hours in the garage apartment, playing games on the console or building model cars together. He was a smart kid, and I could tell he looked up to me. I didn't want him to sense that anything was wrong between me and Olivia, so I made sure to give him as much attention as I could. It wasn't easy juggling everything. I was working the night shift, coaching Ethan's soccer team, and keeping up appearances at home, but I managed. I stayed in the house only for the sake of my sons, so as not to disturb their stability. But then, things took an unexpected turn. It was at one of Ethan's games, a big tournament that meant a lot to the team. We were playing against one of the best teams in the district, and the boys were feeling the pressure. Sarah was there, of course, sitting next to me as usual, and Olivia was in the stands, though she was distracted, probably texting her coworker. I didn't care. I was focused on the game. Ethan had been practicing hard, and I could see how much he wanted to win. But as the game went on, things weren't going our way. The other team was stronger, faster, and our boys were struggling to keep up. With only a few minutes left on the clock, Ethan had the ball and was running toward the goal. I was on the edge of my seat, watching as he dodged the defenders and lined up his shot. But just as he was about to kick, one of the opposing players slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. The crowd gasped, and I jumped to my feet. Ethan wasn't moving. The referee blew the whistle, and the game came to a halt. My heart was racing as I ran onto the field, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. When I reached him, Ethan was clutching his leg, tears streaming down his face. The coach called for the medic, and I knelt beside him, trying to stay calm. It turned out to be a sprain, nothing too serious, but enough to keep him out of the game for a few weeks. Ethan was devastated. He had been working so hard, and now he had to sit out during one of the most important parts of the season. As a father, it broke my heart to see him like that, but I knew I had to be strong for him. I reassured him that he'd be back on the field in no time, but deep down, I knew this was going to be tough for him. Sarah was there for me during all of this. She came over to the house more often, checking in on Ethan and spending time with me when Olivia was working late. We'd sit in the apartment, talking about everything, and slowly but surely, our relationship grew even deeper. It wasn't just a fling anymore. It was something real. I hadn't felt this way about anyone in a long time, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a future to look forward to, one that didn't include Olivia. But as much as I was enjoying my time with Sarah, I couldn't ignore the fact that things were getting more complicated. Olivia was starting to notice that I wasn't as available as I used to be. She'd make comments about how I was always busy, or ask why I spent so much time in the garage. I brushed it off, making excuses about work or needing space, but I could tell she was suspicious. It was only a matter of time before things came to a head. One evening, after a particularly long day, I was in the garage apartment with Sarah, enjoying some quiet time. The boys were downstairs, probably playing video games or watching TV, and Olivia was out, supposedly at a work event. But something felt off. I suppose she had taken my calm demeanor, my willingness to keep up appearances, as a sign that everything was fine. Maybe she thought I was too tired from the night shifts to notice the distance growing between us, or that I was simply too busy with the boys to care. Olivia wasn't stupid, though. She could sense that something was different. I wasn't paying her the same attention anymore, and I certainly wasn't falling over myself to ask how her day was or listen to her complaints about work. It wasn't just the emotional distance either. I had started taking better care of myself, too. I was going to the gym more often, eating healthier, and just overall feeling better about my life, even if my marriage was in shambles. It didn't go unnoticed. Olivia started dropping little comments here and there about how I seemed more distracted, or how I was spending so much time on myself. I could see it in her eyes when we crossed paths in the kitchen, or when I came home from a shift in the morning. She was starting to worry. And that's when she started to pay attention to Sarah. We hadn't officially defined it, but it didn't need a label. I was spending more and more time with her, and she had become someone I could actually talk to. Someone who understood me without judgment, without the baggage of years of marriage built on shaky foundations. One afternoon, while I was out with Ethan at a soccer tournament, Olivia approached Sarah. I wasn't there to witness it, but Sarah told me later that Olivia had asked her to look after me. At first, I couldn't believe it. Olivia knew something was up, and instead of confronting me, she went to Sarah, of all people. The irony was almost laughable. Olivia, completely unaware that Sarah had already been looking after me in ways she never could. I wasn't angry about it. In fact, I wasn't even surprised. It made sense, really. Olivia had always been the type to avoid confrontation when she wasn't ready to face the truth, and maybe in her mind, Sarah was a safe option. She saw Sarah as Ethan's friend's mom, someone harmless who could keep an eye on me when she couldn't be bothered to. What Olivia didn't know was that Sarah had already become more than just someone I passed time with. My relationship with Sarah became real, and I saw my future with her. It wasn't long after that when things started to unravel for Olivia. I think she realized that her lover, Greg, or maybe it was Gary, I honestly never cared to remember his name, wasn't the knight in shining armor she thought he was. From what I could gather, he was just some guy who enjoyed the attention she gave him, but when it came to the important moments, he was never really there for her. I'm sure it stung, realizing that the man she had risked her marriage for wasn't as invested in her as she had been in him. One evening, she tried to end things with him. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I had overheard bits and pieces of their conversations when she thought I wasn't paying attention. There was a desperation in her voice that hadn't been there before, as if she was finally starting to understand the gravity of what she had done. But Greg, or whatever his name was, didn't care. He wasn't invested in her beyond the affair, and that realization must have hit her hard. In the days that followed, Olivia became more desperate. She began to cling to me in ways she hadn't in years, acting as if she could somehow undo the damage that had already been done. I was there for the boys, and that was all. Olivia's infidelity ended our marriage, and we were no longer the family we once were. One morning, I found her sitting in the kitchen, staring at me as I came home from a long shift. I could tell she wanted to say something, to confront me, but she didn't. Instead, she danced around the subject, asking if everything was okay, if I was still happy, if I was still invested in our marriage. It was clear that she was trying to gauge my reactions, trying to figure out if I knew about her affair, or if I was drifting away for other reasons. But I didn't give her the reaction she was looking for. I stayed calm, detached. It was almost surreal, seeing her try to act like the devoted wife again, like the person who cared about me and our family. But it was all too little, too late. I wasn't the same man she had cheated on, and she wasn't the same woman I had married. We were both playing parts in a marriage that had long since died. It all came to a head one weekend when Olivia finally confronted Sarah. I wasn't there when it happened, but Sarah told me everything afterward. Olivia had come to her, demanding to know what was going on between us. She accused Sarah of trying to steal me away, of being some sort of homewrecker who had swooped in to take advantage of our marital troubles. But Sarah didn't lose her cool. She stayed calm, collected, and told Olivia the truth. Told her that I had already left the marriage emotionally long before she had ever entered the picture. She explained that it wasn't her who had driven me away, but Olivia's own actions that had created the distance. Olivia, of course, tried to justify herself. She blamed her affair on loneliness, on feeling neglected, on all the typical excuses people give when they don't want to admit they were wrong. She called Sarah a liar, accused her of manipulating me, of turning me against her. But it didn't matter anymore. I had made my decision long before that conversation took place. I wasn't going to return to Olivia. Whatever spark had been there in the early years of our marriage was long gone, and I wasn't going to pretend that we could somehow fix what was broken. When Olivia confronted me about Sarah, I didn't try to hide it. There was no point. I told her the truth, that I had moved on, that I wasn't interested in salvaging our marriage. She tried to argue, to plead with me to reconsider, but I stayed firm. I would stay in the house until Ethan and Logan finished school, but after that, I was done. Olivia didn't take it well. She oscillated between anger and desperation, trying to guilt me into staying, then accusing me of being unfaithful, as if my relationship with Sarah was the same as her affair. But I knew it wasn't. My relationship with Sarah wasn't born out of betrayal. It was born out of my need for something real, something honest. As the weeks passed, Olivia became more erratic. She would try to initiate conversations about our marriage, about the future, but I kept my distance. I wasn't interested in rehashing the same old arguments or pretending that there was something left to save. My mind was made up. I would be there for the boys, but once they graduated, I was gone. Ethan and Logan, of course, had no idea what was going on between their parents. They were good kids, smart, hardworking, and completely focused on their own lives. I made sure to be there for them, to support them in everything they did. I continued coaching Ethan's soccer team, helping him recover from his injury and get back on the field. Logan and I still spent hours in the garage apartment, playing video games or working on model cars. They were my priority now, and I wasn't going to let Olivia's mistakes affect them. In the end, I think Olivia finally understood that she had lost me. She stopped trying to win me back, stopped making excuses for her affair. We lived in the same house, but we were nothing more than strangers sharing a roof. I slept in the garage apartment, and she stayed in the master bedroom. It wasn't a perfect arrangement, but it worked. The boys didn't suspect anything, and that was all that mattered. Sarah and I continued to see each other, though we kept our relationship discreet. I wasn't ready to disrupt the boys' lives any more than I had to, and Sarah respected that. She understood that my priority was my sons, and she never pressured me to leave Olivia before I was ready. She was patient, supportive, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had found someone who truly understood me. The years passed, and eventually, Ethan and Logan graduated. They were both off to college, ready to start their own lives. I was proud of them, proud of the men they were becoming. And once they were gone, I knew it was time to move on with my own life. I filed for divorce shortly after they left for college. Olivia didn't fight it. I think, deep down, she had known this day was coming for a long time. There were no dramatic confrontations, no arguments over who was to blame. We were both ready to move on. As for Sarah and me, we took things slow. We had been through enough to know that relationships aren't always easy, but we also knew that we had something worth holding on to. I moved out of the house and into my own place. A real home this time, not just an apartment above a garage. Sarah was there with me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was starting over, but in the best way possible. Looking back, I realized that things didn't turn out the way I had expected, but maybe that's okay. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and sometimes, the only thing you can do is roll with the punches. I wasn't perfect, and neither was Olivia, but we both did what we thought was best at the time. In the end, I found my peace, and I found someone who made me happy. That's all I could ever ask for.